Hello everybody, this is Mr. Lipchick, and today we're going to talk about fiscal policy. Okay, fiscal policy essentially is the use of government spending and revenue collection to influence the economy. The U.S. government spends about $2.3 trillion a year, so this is an enormous influence on the economy. Government spending, because of its sheer size, impacts aggregate supply and aggregate demand within the economy. And as you remember earlier from the course, aggregate demand is basically what pushes the economy forward. Fiscal policy is used to achieve economic growth, stability, full employment, and price stability. And the federal budget, which is the tool of fiscal policy, is created every year and helps to determine spending. So revenue collection in the form of taxation and spending money on the part of governments is what constitutes fiscal policy. Be sure to remember this and distinguish this from monetary policy, which we will talk about later in the course. Okay, the federal budget is a plan for the federal government's revenues and spending for the upcoming year. And the government plans how much money it will spend and how much will be collected in revenues for 1 year. And the fiscal year is a 12-month period of accounting that can begin on any date. So it does not need to correspond with the calendar year. For our federal government, the fiscal year is October 1st through September 30th of the following calendar year. So fiscal years are designed to kind of help out an institution according to its economic activity. For instance, the fiscal year of most schools begins on July 1st because it's the summer months. They're incurring less expenses. It's the best time for them to do the budget. Well, this early fall time corresponds with our election calendar better, and it is best for us to use this fiscal calendar, okay, in regards to the federal budget. Okay, as you can see, there are certain areas of the federal budget which are pretty considerable, especially the areas of defense, Social Security, and Medicare and Medicaid. The Office of Budget and Management and Budget, or OMB, is a government office that manages the federal budget. The OMB is a special unit of the executive branch that works closely with the president in preparing his budget proposal. And the federal agency heads must meet with the president to justify the money in their budget. They cannot assume that it's a given. And this is done to ensure that there is not much economic waste. The OMB then meets with the president's staff to combine all the agency budgets into one federal budget, which the president presents to Congress in January or February. And they could approve this budget or not approve it. Congressional Budget Office is a government agency that provides economic data to Congress. CBO was created in 1974 to provide Congress with an independent economic data for budget decision making. The House Budget Committee and Senate Budget Committee combine their work into an initial budget resolution that must be adopted by May 15th. And a final congressional budget resolution must be passed by September 15th. You may ask, why does Congress have its own, its own budget office? And this emerged in the early 70s due to turmoil within the executive branch and public distrust of much of what the executive branch had been doing. And appropriations committees for each house submit appropriations bills to the president. An appropriations bill is a bill that sets aside money for a specific purpose. Once the president and Congress agree on an appropriations bill, the president signs the budget into law. Okay, so you may be asking, how does this all affect the economy? Okay, what impact does fiscal policy, that is spending and revenue collection, have on the economy? The amount of government spending can be used to increase or decrease economic output. There is expansionary fiscal policy, where fiscal policies such as higher spending and tax cuts encourage economic growth. And there is contractionary fiscal policy, where fiscal policies lower basically lower spending and higher taxes that reduce economic growth. And there are valid reasons for doing this, contrary to what popular wisdom might say. Okay, the goal of an expansionary fiscal policy is to increase the level of output in the economy. It's used to encourage economic growth and to take the economy out of a recession or to prevent a recession. Expansionary fiscal policy falls into two basic categories. One is increasing government spending through government projects and various things, and cutting taxes. Okay, increasing government spending triggers a chain of events that raises output and creates jobs. It increases aggregate demand, causing prices to rise. And suppliers of goods and services are encouraged to produce more and hire more workers, lowering unemployment. Tax cuts work like government spending to encourage economic expansion. When governments cut taxes, people have more money to spend on goods and services, and businesses have more to spend on land, labor, and capital. And the cuts encourage increased demand, prices, and output. Now, it's important to keep in mind, however, that tax cuts are not as effective as government spending in expanding demand. They have limited impact. Okay, now we come to contractionary policies. Well, why on earth would we want a contractionary fiscal policy? Basically, it is used as a preventative measure to stave off serious economic problems that can result from continued expansionary policies. So a contractionary fiscal policy decreases aggregate demand and thereby reduces the growth of economic output. Contractionary fiscal policy is used by the government to slow economic growth when demand is exceeding supply. If producers cannot expand production to meet demand, they will raise their prices. And higher prices leads to inflation, eroding consumer purchasing power, and discouraging economic growth and stability. To slow the economy, the government may decrease government spending. Decreased spending leads to decreased aggregate demand. Prices drop, leading employers to lay off workers. And the growth rate of the economy slows and GDP may fall. The government may also raise taxes, leaving individuals with less money to spend or save in the future. Firms keep their profits and spend less on land, labor, and capital. Demand drops and prices tend to fall. And producers lower production. And the growth rate of GDP may fall. Okay, the mission of contractionary fiscal policy is not to destroy the economy. It's to slow it down and prevent a future inflationary outburst and the problems that go along with that. Okay, so what are the limits of fiscal policy? All policies have their limits. It is difficult for the government to change spending levels. Okay, 60% of the federal government is already set aside for entitlement programs guaranteed to people by law. The federal government must make its cuts in discretionary spending, such as education and defense, which are unpopular cuts. It is difficult for policymakers to predict the future behavior of the economy as well. The lawmaking process takes time, and fiscal policies that are passed often do not keep pace with economic changes. And changes in fiscal policy take time to affect the economy. The budget process itself takes over a year. By the time a fiscal policy begins having its effects, the economy might be moving in the opposite direction. In such a case, the policy might add to the economic trend with unintended consequences. And fiscal policy has been likened to a salt truck in the winter. We've all seen them, spreading salt to stabilize the roads. The truck moves at a slow pace, By the time it's done, the weather may have changed. We've all seen a salt truck driving down a clean, clear street spreading salt. Okay, very policies are very similar. They take a lot of time to implement, and by the time they're implemented, the economy may be moving in another direction, and they can actually be harmful. Fiscal policy is difficult to coordinate between state, local, and federal government. One level of government may be pursuing a contractionary fiscal policy, while the other is implementing expansionary policy. And unlike the federal government, most state and local governments are not permitted to run deficits. And different regions of the economy may experience different effects from the same fiscal policy. So if you're living in Nebraska and you're a cattle rancher and someone else is living in Pittsburgh and they are a factory worker, different fiscal policies will affect economies in different ways and can have a different outcome depending on the economic region or the prevailing industry in your area. Also, the short-term effects of fiscal policy may be different than the long-term effects. Government spending may boost production and employment in the short term, but lead to inflation in the long term. And decreased government spending in the short term may create unemployment and slow economic growth, but can lead to prosperity in the long term by leaving room for more private investments and controlling inflation. So let's just keep in mind that fiscal policy is a powerful tool. The government has a major chunk of the economy in its hands through its spending and taxing, but fiscal policies do have their limitations for the various reasons that we outlined. I appreciate you participating, and I look forward to speaking with you in the future. Have a great day.